All right, so we kind of got the historical background of the Heian period. So again, it's like sort of 400 or 500 year time where Japan is politically rather peaceful, stable, um, economically prosperous. Uh, society's running very smoothly, and out of that, right, comes this usually periods when there's times of political and economic prosperity. They usually lead to cultural production, and that's really what we see very much in the Heian period. And you can see sort of the center of it was literature, literary production that was being produced, being written in it predominantly in the Heian court, and then would influence other courts, other regions, and then very poets and literary authors would then come to Kyoto as the center of this literary world. So one of the first big ones is this form of Japanese poetry called waka poetry, and the first sort of anthology of waka poets called the Kokinshu was the emperor brought together all the famous waka poets and made like the first encyclopedia of all these poems. So this really revived poetry and reading poetry. Here's an example of early waka poetry down here. Really became part of this court culture that people would make poems, read poems, and it's very much borrowed from the Chinese model of where poetry was sort of this sign of sophistication that culture that people were trying to express within this court setting. So by the imperial support for waka poetry, it inspired a lot of other poets to write. So this is kind of the age of waka poetry. And then the other big thing was this is kind of the first elements of stories or novels that people would be produced and then reproduced that people could read. And the two famous ones here are Sei Shonagon's The Pillow Book, written in 1002 CE, right in the height of the Heian period. This is like a diary style, a Nikki style book where she talks about, but this also sort of talks about the intrigues of her life. Gives us a very good insight into what it meant to be a woman in the Heian court. In fact, a lot of the people writing at this time were women, so we get this really interesting perspective of the Heian relationships, interworkings of this court life through the perspective of a woman who had certain limitations they could do, but within the movements of these worlds, but could talk about the political intrigues, the day-to-day life of things. Here's a nice little image of sort of the world, the Heian world here. There. And then the one that we're going to be reading this week is The Tale of Genji by Murasaki Shikibu. Again, written right at the same time. They were contemporaries. And this is one of the most famous stories in all of Japan. In fact, some could talk sort of all of world history. This is sometimes seen as one of the first novels, a sort of narrative tale, the monogatari style of writing, where we'll look at we'll expand on this a little more when we discuss the Tale of Genji. But this type of sort of narrative tales, this figure who has all these different adventures and becomes very much part of Japanese literature. A lot of the stories are going to emulate this style. And another important part of this moment is that this is when the hiragana katakana script forms. Right? You can kind of see this is hiragana. Katakana is a little more straight lines. But this is a shift away. So before this is also as Kyoto and Japan and the Heian period becomes more, solidified. They move a little bit away from China. They, in the beginning, they were basing a lot of their how they functioned and political, economic structures and even architectural structures on the Chinese model. As the Tang Dynasty starts to decline, Japan comes into its own, and one of the ways it shifts is it stops using or relies on Chinese writing styles, which in Japan is called kanji, which still exists today. They still use kanji, but they developed two sort of simplified scripts that were able to express these points, hiragana and katakana, and all three scripts are used today. So if you ever read Japanese, you'll see Chinese characters, the kanji, you'll see hiragana and katakana all within the same sentence. So, but here you can kind of see the early hiragana of the waka. So the writing literature becomes part of this world within the period. Another big one is fashion here. Here you see this the 12-layer dress from this is sort of silk that was brought in to again introduced from China. These silk, right? But then made into Japanese fashion. So these 12-layer dress, so you would have these 12 layers on, which you can see was very much, if you look at some of the pictures, go back and look at some of the pictures of the Heian that we've seen here, all those very billowing, full clothing options, that's these 12-layer dress. And it was very, it showed status, it showed your ability to have this much fabric, it showed your ability to, you had to have your I guess your attendees put on your dress, take them off. You needed to get things, be able to wash, all of those things. So, this is very much a status symbol within the court life, and that's when you see these pictures of these people and all this sort of, these large billowing dresses. This is part of the Junihitoe dress. So, and this will become later on, right? This is the beginning of what will become and we'll know as the kimono. Which is not so 12 layers, but there's definitely layers within the kimono and put it on as well. So if you're into Japanese fashion, this is very much sort of the early fashion there. And some other parts of Heian fashions, they would always brighten their face with white sort of makeup, and they would blacken their teeth. That was just the way that that's what they saw was very fashionable. And then another big part of this was art and architecture. This new form of art came about, this Yamato-e, which was these huge scrolls, large scroll art, which here we can get to see an example of it. This is more contemporary style, but it's emulating this. We do have a couple records of these from the Heian period, but they're not very, they're sort of deteriorated. But here you can see a few things, and it's very much focused on Japanese life. This is Genji again. A lot of these were elements of the tale of Genji, which we'll get into here in a little bit. But Genji looking at these women who are about to take a bath. So you see the nature here, the waterfalls. You see the women. Here's their flowing dresses, this fashion you can see. And so the art was meant to sort of tell stories of illustrated scrolls, so people could, even if you couldn't read the tale of Genji, you would know the story, and then you could look at this art, so it's sort of reinforcing that. And this played very much in this new form of architecture, the Shinden Zukuri, which were these very open structures. So a lot of the villas, a lot of the Heian court would have their own sort of, they would be at the court, but then they would have their own houses, right? Their own villas. Here you can see these interior court rooms, what they look like on the inside, but the outside was very symmetrical, very open. They always had a garden in the center. So, and when we read the tale of Genji, we're gonna, a lot of the setting is in some of these court. They're sort of the imperial houses. So you had the court itself, where day-to-day business was, and then all of the high-ranking Fujiwara and other families would have these huge villas all throughout the Kyoto, greater Kyoto area. In fact, that Uji, where the Byodoin is located, that was one of the summer residencies of the imperial family, or the Fujiwara family. I'm sorry, and then they turned it into a very famous Buddhist site. So kind of get the art, architecture, fashion, all of this working together, all within this world. And just kind of to get to the tale of Genji a little bit, which exemplifies a lot of that. Here's Genji up here. Here's the tale of Genji. Again, sort of one of the early world's first novels. Murasaki Shikibu was the author. She was a real person. Her father was a lower minister and also a poet. Her mother was a poet, so she came from a literary background. So she was already writing, and in the Heian period, women could be writers. In fact, it was sort of the women. It was one thing women were part of their sort of duties. If you're going to sort of gender identification, the women were sort of the writing education. It sort of reflects the education of the Heian period. She actually marries into the Fujiwara family. She marries a part of that, so she's very much inside this world. And then later she becomes the court lady of the Empress Shoshi, who is the wife of the Emperor Ichigo and the daughter of Fujiwara Michinaga. So you can sort of see that she is very much embedded into this world. So when she's talking about the tale of Genji, she's reflecting the world she sees. So she's sort of outside of it, but she marries as one of the Fujiwaras, and then she is a court lady of the Empress. So an attendant of the Empress. She's an attendant, or she was herself an attendant of the Empress. So she was part of this world. And that's what this book is all about, the tale of Genji. Here it's 54 chapters, kind of two parts. The first part is chapters 1 through 40, where Genji is a main character. He is, in this world, he is the son of Emperor Kiritsubo, who is a sort of fictional emperor, but a lot of the traits are probably reflective of the imperial world she sees. And the big thing, as you'll get when we read the first chapter there, that Genji is also the son of the minor wife of the emperor. So that gives us all sorts of insights into how the social structures of that and how it works. And then we're not going to read the entire tale of Genji. Picked out a little bit of reading for you there. And then it shifts, and then then the second half of the story shifts to Genji's grandson, and kind of who he is. He's the mother of Genji's son of that. So, but it gets a little complicated. But anyways, but really, what this whole thing focuses about court life, explains court life, a lot of relationships. I mean, one big thing about Genji, as we'll see, is he's always going into these relationships with these women. He's running around all over the place. He's getting in all these palace intrigues, and so it really gives us an insight into what life was like in the Heian court, and also a lot of poetry embedded in this are a lot of these poets, or poems, and we'll see as well. So, and these poems were meant to express some of these ideas. And then one chapter we'll look at, and specifically is chapter 4 called Evening Faces. Which is all about Genji goes to visit his buddy, his childhood nurse, who's the mom was the mom of his good friend Koremitsu. There's always a lot of characters in Tale of Genji, so don't get stuck on that too much. But as he's there visiting, he sees this girl, Yugao, who's it's the name of this flower, but also the flower is named Evening Faces, who's younger, well, I guess about the same age as Genji, but she's sort of like she's living in she's sort of a lower status. So she also used to date a friend of Genji's, and maybe even has a child with this person. So there's always all these little intrigues here. But Genji sees her and is like, oh my God, I'm so in love, right? And so the whole chapter is about them sort of pursuing each other, but they don't want to tell each other who they are. So that's also really cleverly written, where they never really reveal who they are, because he doesn't want to know that Genji doesn't want to let her know that he's Genji, because he's sort of out of the palace, and he doesn't want people to know that he's out there, and she doesn't want him to know, because she kind of has an idea that Genji knows this guy, and so she doesn't want to make it a big deal. They finally do get together, and then some other things happen, which I won't spoil it. Well, I guess I did spoil it. They have a tryst, and then she dies. But it's a little more complicated than that. So read that chapter. Because this is one chapter, so many different levels of intrigue and insights into the world of the Heian period. So that's the sort of cultural height of the Heian golden age of Japanese culture.